Hello, my name is Carole. 15 years ago, my own sister screamed, "You're not my blood," and threw me out like I was nothing. I walked away with empty hands, carrying only the sting of betrayal. For years, I rebuilt my life, wondering if her words were cruelty or something darker hiding beneath. And then, one night, she came back to my door, whispering, "Help me." Why would the sister who erased me from the family suddenly beg for my hand? What secret was she so desperate to keep buried? I remember the way the living room lights glared down on me that night, too bright, too harsh, as if the bulbs themselves had chosen sides. I had always thought family gatherings were supposed to be noisy, full of laughter and the clinking of dishes, but that evening turned into something else entirely. I was 22, still the youngest, the one who everyone thought didn't know much. Cressida's voice cut through the air like shattered glass. "You're not my blood!" she screamed, her face twisted with fury. For a moment, I thought I misheard her. My ears rang as if the whole house had swallowed her words, but then silence fell. It was the kind of silence that makes your chest tighten. I turned toward my parents, expecting them to correct her, to laugh at the absurdity of what she'd said. But my father's gaze dropped to the floor, and my mother pressed her lips together, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of the tablecloth. Nobody defended me. Nobody said, "That's enough." I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. "Cressida," I whispered, "why would you say something like that?" My voice shook, not with weakness, but with disbelief. "You don't belong here," she snapped back. "You never did." I stared at her, my older sister, the one I had followed around as a child, the one I thought I admired. Suddenly her words cut deeper than anything I'd ever known. The rejection wasn't just hers, it was magnified by the silence of the two people who were supposed to protect me. The walls of the house felt smaller, pressing against me. The air smelled faintly of roast chicken and cinnamon pie, yet I felt nauseous. Betrayal clung to me like smoke. And in that instant, the bond I thought could never be broken cracked wide open. The argument escalated faster than I could comprehend. Cressida stormed down the hallway, grabbed the suitcase I had left by the stairs, just a small bag I had packed for a short stay, and dragged it toward the porch. "You think you deserve this family? Take your things and go!" she shouted, flinging the suitcase so hard that it toppled over onto the wooden planks outside. I stood frozen, my hands trembling at my sides. "You can't mean this," I said softly, looking at her with searching eyes. "We're sisters. No matter how angry you are." She cut me off with a bitter laugh. "Sisters, don't flatter yourself." I waited for my parents to intervene. My mother looked away, pretending to fix her coffee though her cup was already full. My father exhaled deeply, his shoulders slumping as if this moment was too heavy for him to carry. He didn't move to help me. It was then I realized. I was standing in a house filled with people who had decided I wasn't worth defending. The porch light flickered overhead as I stepped outside, the suitcase handle cold in my grip. I remember the sound of crickets chirping in the humid Carolina night, so ordinary against the extraordinary collapse of my world. I glanced back once, hoping, just hoping, that one of them would call out. The door closed instead, the latch clicking with finality. My legs carried me forward, though my chest felt hollow. I wasn't just leaving the house, I was being erased from it. Years later, I can still trace that wound back to my childhood. Being the youngest had always meant fighting to be heard. Cressida used to mock me relentlessly, telling me I was different, that I didn't fit. I brushed it off then, thinking it was just an older sister's cruelty. There were times she would sneak out with friends and leave me behind, laughing when I asked to tag along. I remember sitting on the porch steps as a child, knees drawn up, listening to their car drive away. I told myself it didn't matter, that my imagination was company enough. And yet, there had been whispers, offhand comments from relatives about how I looked so unlike the rest. At the time, I thought nothing of it. But that night, her words pulled those old threads together in a way that left me unraveling. Still, My father's voice echoed in my memory, a phrase he used to repeat when I was small. Blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family. I held on to that, even as I realized loyalty was in short supply in our household. I learned early that being disregarded could either crush you or forge you. That night, I wasn't sure which way I would break. As I dragged my suitcase down the gravel path, the rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavier. My shirt clung to my skin, but I didn't let go of the handle. The bag was heavy, water dripping off its corners, but I held it tight as if it were tethered to my future. I found myself staring at my reflection in a darkened window along the street. My hair was plastered against my face, mascara running down my cheeks. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. But then I whispered to her, quiet, deliberate, "I will prove you wrong." It wasn't anger that filled me then, but something sturdier, a seed of determination planted in the middle of devastation. They could strip me of a roof, of belonging, but they couldn't dictate my worth. 15 years have passed since that vow, and I have lived each day as if building a case for myself. Every job I took, every challenge I faced, every choice I made was a step toward proving I wasn't the weak one they believed. The suitcase, waterlogged and battered that night, became more than a bag of clothes. It became a symbol of everything I carried forward. Pain, yes, but also resilience. Now, in the quiet of my own home, years later, I sit with those memories when the knock comes. At first, I think it must be the neighbor or maybe a delivery, but the sound is hesitant, uneven. I open the door, and there she is, Cressida, my sister. Her face pale, her eyes wide, lips trembling as she whispers, "Help me." My breath catches. 15 years ago, she cast me out as if I were nothing. And now she stands before me, her voice cracking, her body shaking. I grip the doorframe, steadying myself against the tide of emotions surging inside me. Shock, curiosity, and, if I'm honest, a flicker of something else, power. For the first time, the dynamic has shifted. In that instant, one thought pulses through my mind, sharp and unrelenting. What could drive her back to me now? My father's words came like a knife, quiet but sharp enough to slice through the little hope I had left. "Maybe it's better this way, Carole. Less conflict in the house." I looked at him, expecting something more. Maybe a sign in his eyes that he didn't mean it, that it was just a momentary weakness. But his face was steady, his tone deliberate. He wasn't defending me, he was excusing her. My mother stood by the window, her hands busying themselves with the curtain as if the fabric had suddenly become the most urgent thing in the world. She wouldn't look at me. That silence from her was worse than Cressida's scream, shouting. I could fight against silence. It felt like I had been erased. I turned my head toward the mantel, where the family portrait still hung in its golden frame. There we all were, smiling stiffly for the camera, my parents in the center, Cressida beside them, and me tucked to the side like an afterthought. That picture still stayed on the wall, even as I was being told to leave. "Are you really just going to stand there?" I asked, my voice breaking. But neither of them answered. My father folded his arms. My mother's gaze stayed fixed on anything but me. The humiliation burned hotter than the tears threatening to spill. I had never felt so small in my life, and yet I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me collapse. I walked down the hall, into the room that had once been mine. The door creaked when I pushed it open, as if the house itself knew I didn't belong anymore. I reached for my suitcase, the same one Cressida had hurled outside earlier. I set it upright and began filling it with whatever clothes I could grab. The silence was so thick that every zipper, every fold of fabric sounded like thunder. My hands shook, but I forced myself to keep packing. From the hallway came her laugh, Cressida's voice dripping with cruelty. "Don't take too long. This isn't your room anymore." Her words echoed like a nail hammered into wood. I didn't respond. I wouldn't give her the power of my reaction. Instead, I picked up the one thing that still mattered, my old leather-bound journal. Its edges were worn, the pages crinkled from years of scribbled dreams and secrets. It was the only piece of my past I wanted to carry forward. I closed the suitcase with finality, the snap of the latch louder than anything said in that house. I glanced toward the living room, where my parents stood as shadows against the dim lamp glow. No one moved toward me, no arms opened, no words were spoken. Just silence, heavy and unforgiving. That was my goodbye. The floor groaned beneath my weight as I walked toward the front door. My breathing sounded too loud, filling the empty spaces between their silence. I gripped the suitcase handle tightly, my knuckles white against the dark leather. When I stepped onto the porch, the light above me flickered again, buzzing weakly, as though even the house wanted to mock my leaving. The night air was damp and cold, pressing against my skin like unwelcome hands. A dog barked somewhere down the street, the sound sharp and distant, reminding me that life outside these walls went on, unaware, uncaring of the fracture that had just torn my world apart. Behind me, the door closed. No pause, no hesitation, just the slam and the click of the lock. That sound reverberated in my chest more painfully than any word they could have hurled at me. I'm not just leaving a house, I thought as I stood there, staring at the closed door. I'm leaving everything I thought was family. The truth of it crushed down on me, heavier than the suitcase in my hand. As I walked away from the porch, I thought back to the years I spent trying to earn Cressida's approval, the countless times I shadowed her, eager for scraps of attention. The way I defended her to others, even when she had mocked me, none of it mattered. It hit me with a bitter clarity. Sometimes the cruelest words aren't shouted by strangers but whispered or screamed by the people who sit across from you at dinner. There's an old American saying, "Home is where they take you in." That night, I learned the other side of it. My so-called home shut the door on me. I had always been told that blood defined kinship, that family was unshakable. But if that were true, why did I feel more like a stranger than a daughter? Loyalty, I realized, was the only glue strong enough to hold people together. And loyalty was the one thing my family had never offered me. The bitterness was sharp, but beneath it stirred something else, a quiet awakening. If they could cut me out so easily, maybe it was never really about me. Maybe the sickness had always been in them. The rain began as a drizzle, speckling the sidewalk as I pulled my suitcase into the night. The wheels rattled over the uneven concrete, splashing against shallow puddles. Each step felt heavier, but I refused to stop. I turned once, glancing back at the house that had been my childhood anchor. The porch light, weak and stubborn, sputtered, and then went out. Darkness swallowed the house whole. I gripped the suitcase tighter, lifting it fully off the ground despite its weight. The rain soaked my hair, plastered it against my cheeks, but I kept walking. That night, I told myself silently, I thought I was walking into nothing. I didn't know I was walking toward my future. But just as that thought steadied me, I noticed something, a shape across the street, a figure standing still, half hidden by the shadow of a tree, watching. My steps faltered. For a second, I thought I might be imagining it, but the figure didn't move. The unease wrapped around me, colder than the rain, sharper than the rejection I'd just endured. Whoever it was, they weren't part of my family. Yet they were there, silent as if waiting. The rain had no mercy that night. It pounded against the pavement, drenching my hair until it clung to my face in tangled strands. My clothes stuck to me, heavy and cold, each drop seeping deeper into my skin, like the sting of a punishment I hadn't earned. I dragged my suitcase down the empty street, its wheels bumping against the uneven cracks in the sidewalk, sometimes catching so badly that I had to stop and yank it free with both hands. My palms burned from gripping the handle too tightly, but I wouldn't let go. That suitcase, as pitiful as it looked, was the only anchor I had left. House after house stood in silence, porch lights glowing faintly. Behind windows, I could see families gathered around tables, passing dishes, laughing, their warmth spilling out into the night like a cruel reminder of what I no longer had. Once, those kinds of evenings had been mine too, or at least I had thought so. Now they belonged to other people, while I was the stranger outside, wet and unwelcomed. I passed Mrs. Alden's house. She'd known me since I was a child. For a moment, I thought maybe I could knock on her door. But before I could even take a step closer, her porch light flicked off. Whether she saw me or not, the message was clear. I had an address, but no home. Each step grew heavier, and the rhythm of my footsteps merged with the drum of rainfall. My breath came out in white clouds, shaky, uneven. I told myself to keep moving, that stopping would only make me freeze. Yet with every block I covered, I felt less like a daughter, less like a sister, more like a ghost wandering streets that didn't want me. When I finally stumbled into the downtown bus station, the world shifted. The rain was shut out, replaced by a stale metallic air that smelled faintly of old coffee and mop water. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered and buzzed, casting pale shadows on the cracked linoleum floors. Paint peeled from the walls in thin curls, and the vending machines hummed like tired companions, unwilling to stop working, despite their age. I scanned the room. A man slumped over on one of the benches, his head bobbing as he muttered words too slurred to make sense. A girl, no older than 16, sat cross-legged with a backpack at her feet, her eyes darting nervously every time someone walked past. Behind the scratched glass window, a cashier sat at the counter, flipping lazily through a magazine, barely acknowledging anyone's presence. I chose a corner bench, dragging my suitcase close to me, hugging it like a shield. The vinyl seat was sticky from years of use, but it didn't matter. All I wanted was something solid beneath me, somewhere I could breathe without being pushed out. Yet even here, among the forgotten and overlooked, I felt invisible. Nobody cared that I was young, soaked, and shaking. Nobody cared that I was alone. My body trembled with exhaustion, but my mind refused to quiet. Was this what it meant to be cast out? Not just losing a bed or a roof, but losing the sense that anyone in the world saw you as worth keeping. The loneliness pressed against me harder than the wet clothes clinging to my skin. "Here," a voice said gently, startling me. I looked up and saw a woman standing in front of me. She couldn't have been more than her mid-30s, her clothes simple, hair pulled back neatly. In her hand was a steaming paper cup. She held it out. "Coffee. It's not much, but it's hot." I froze. My first instinct was suspicion. What did she want? People didn't hand out kindness for free, at least not in my experience. "I'm fine," I muttered, though the shiver in my voice betrayed me. She tilted her head, studying me with eyes that weren't judging, just observing. "You look like you've had a rough night." "Believe me, I know what that feels like." I hesitated, then reached out slowly, the warmth of the cup shocking against my frozen fingers. I brought it close, inhaling the bitter scent, and for the first time all night, something inside me loosened. The woman sat down beside me. "I was your age when I got kicked out. Different reasons, same ending, door slams, and you're on your own." Her words landed like stones in my chest. How could a stranger speak so directly to the hollow ache I was carrying? I wanted to push her away, to keep the walls around me high. But another part of me, the desperate, lonely part, leaned toward her voice like it was a lifeline. I didn't answer, not yet. But I didn't move away either. As I sipped the coffee, lukewarm now, but still better than nothing, I couldn't help comparing her gesture to what had just happened at home. A stranger with no obligation had offered me comfort, while my own sister had spit venom at me, my parents had stood silent, and the house I grew up in had turned its back. Sometimes strangers treat you more like family than your own blood ever will. My father's old saying came back to me. Blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family. He used to say that with pride, like it was wisdom. Tonight it felt like irony. I pressed the cup against my lips, whispering into the steam so quietly I doubted anyone else could hear. If they don't want me, I'll build a life without them. The words weren't just defiance, they were a vow. For the first time, I started thinking not about what I had lost, but what I might create. I pictured a job, an apartment of my own, a table where I decided who sat and who didn't. Survival wasn't just about making it through the night, it was about proving I could exist without their permission. The station quieted as the hours dragged on. The drunk man staggered out, the young girl curled up tighter against her backpack, and even the cashier disappeared into the back room. My eyelids grew heavy, and I let my head rest against the hard wall, clutching my suitcase like a lifeline. That's when I heard them. Two men, standing near the vending machines, their voices low but sharp enough to catch my attention. "Did you hear about Marcus Whitfield?" one said. I froze. That was my father's name. The other chuckled. "Everybody in town's been talking. His reputation's not what he pretends it is. You know what they say about people who look too perfect." I gripped my suitcase tighter, my heart thudding. They went on, voices carrying through the empty station. "Shame about his family. Word spreads fast when the cracks start showing." My blood ran cold. Even here, miles from that porch, my family's shadow stretched after me. My humiliation wasn't locked behind our walls. It was already bleeding into the streets, whispered among strangers. Lying there, my eyes wide open now, I realized something chilling. This wasn't just about rejection. Something deeper, something darker, was tied to my family name. And I was only beginning to glimpse it. The morning light filtered weakly through the grimy bus station windows, washing everything in a pale gray that felt more like an accusation than a beginning. I shifted on the hard bench, my back sore, my legs stiff from being curled up all night. The dampness of my clothes hadn't dried, the air clung to me as though determined to remind me where I'd been. My suitcase rested against my feet, a loyal but heavy companion. I rubbed my eyes and thought about the voices I had overheard just hours before. Men whispering my father's name like it was part of some local rumor mill. They hadn't said much, but they had said enough. Enough to plant a seed of suspicion that twisted in my stomach. Secrets have a way of chasing you, even when you try to outrun them. That was the thought echoing in my head as the sun stretched over Raleigh, touching the streets with fragile gold. It wasn't just about my sister's cruelty anymore, or my parents' silence. Maybe their rejection had roots deeper than me. Maybe the door they shut wasn't about my mistakes at all, but about keeping me from uncovering theirs. That suspicion, faint but burning, carried me to my feet. I wasn't going back to beg for love. I needed answers. The diner smelled like salvation. Grease and coffee mingled in the air, a scent as warm as any blanket. My stomach growled the moment I walked in, reminding me I hadn't eaten since the previous afternoon. I slid into a booth by the window, peeling my damp jacket off my shoulders. The waitress came over, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes, but a smile that reached them anyway. "What'll it be, hun?" I counted the crumpled bills in my pocket. "Just toast. And coffee, please." She gave me a long look, her eyes scanning the wet hair, the worn suitcase, the fatigue I couldn't hide. Without a word, she scribbled on her pad and walked away. A few minutes later, she returned with not just toast, but eggs and bacon, the plate steaming, the aroma nearly undoing me. "I only ordered," I started. "On the house," she said firmly, pouring coffee into my chipped mug. "You look like you need it more than I do." The generosity hit harder than the hunger. I nodded, biting back words that would sound too small for what she'd just given me. As I ate, I watched families filter in and out. Parents slid pancakes across the table to their children. Husbands teased their wives over too much syrup. Laughter punctuated the clatter of forks against plates. It was all so ordinary and so foreign. The waitress came back, refilling my cup without asking. "You know, honey, sometimes blood isn't what makes family. Loyalty is." Her words hung in the air. I smiled faintly, though it felt brittle. Loyalty. My own family had shown me none. Yet here was a stranger reminding me what the word could mean. For a moment, I felt visible again. Not invisible, not erased, just a person sitting at a table, sharing space with the living. I left the diner with a little warmth in my chest, though it cooled the moment I stepped outside. The streets were waking, cars humming, shopkeepers unlocking doors. That's when I saw him. Mr. Harris, the man who used to live 2 houses down from us when I was a girl. He recognized me instantly. "Carole?" he asked, squinting. "Haven't seen you in years. Shouldn't you be home?" Home. The word tasted bitter. "Not exactly," I said carefully. "Cressida and I had a fight." His expression shifted, unease flickering across his face. He looked like he wanted to say something, then thought better of it, but the hesitation betrayed him. "What is it?" I pressed, stepping closer. "You know something." He shook his head quickly, adjusting the bag in his arms. "It's nothing, just I've heard talk. Your family's had some troubles, that's all." My breath caught. "What kind of troubles?" But he was already backing away. "I shouldn't be saying anything. Take care of yourself, Carole." And with that, he hurried down the street, leaving me with questions that screamed louder than his silence. Everyone knew something about me, about us, except me. The thought lodged in my chest like a splinter. Restless, I found a payphone near the corner and dug out change. My fingers shook as I dialed Cressida's number. The ring dragged on before her voicemail clicked. I waited for the beep, then spoke, my voice steady despite the knot in my throat. "If you threw me out because of something I don't know, then have the courage to tell me. Don't let me wander in the dark. Say it to my face." I hung up before I could second-guess myself. The seconds stretched, the silence humming in my ears as I stared at the phone, half hoping it would ring back. Instead, my cell buzzed in my pocket with a message. I opened it. The words sliced cleaner than any blade. "Stay away, Carole. You don't belong to us. Stop digging." I read it again, my hands trembling, the letters blurring as rage surged through me. Not only rejection, but a warning. She knew something, and she would rather cut me off entirely than risk me finding it. My pulse raced. Anger, yes, but beneath it, defiance. If the truth was dangerous enough to make my own sister spit venom, then the truth was my only weapon. I slammed the payphone receiver down so hard the sound echoed through the street. My reflection stared back at me from the glass booth. Wet hair, tired eyes, clenched jaw. I didn't look like the girl who left the porch in tears the night before. I looked like someone who had been stripped down to her bones and was ready to fight. Their lies, their whispers, their silence, it all added up to something bigger than me. And if they thought fear would keep me quiet, they had forgotten who I was. That was the morning I stopped begging for love and started searching for answers. The clinic wasn't much to look at from the outside, just a squat brick building with a faded sign and a parking lot that had more cracks than smooth pavement. But to me, it felt like a doorway back into life. My first day as a receptionist, and it wasn't glamorous by any measure. Still, the moment Dr. Weston handed me my badge, something inside me straightened. It had my name on it. Just my name. No sister, no parents, no label of shame or rejection. For a second, I ran my thumb across the plastic as though it might vanish. Dr. Weston, a man in his late 40s with silver threading through his hair, smiled at me with none of the pity I had expected. "We're glad to have you here, Carole. Take it one step at a time. You'll do fine." That kindness, so simple, made my chest ache. I settled into the desk, the hum of the printer beside me, the shuffle of files. Work didn't just promise a paycheck, it gave me a kind of ground beneath my feet. My own desk, my own phone line, my own small place in the world. As the hours stretched, answering calls and filing charts, I felt an unfamiliar sense of stability. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was functioning. I belonged somewhere. I thought, maybe foolishly, work doesn't just give you money, it gives you back pieces of yourself. By lunchtime, that fragile hope cracked. I was standing by the vending machine, sipping a soda, when I heard it. Two women from the billing office standing just around the corner, voices hushed but sharp enough to carry. "Did you hear about that Carter girl? Her sister kicked her out, said she's not real family." My heart lurched. I froze, soda halfway to my lips. "Cressida told people herself," the other whispered, lowering her voice like it was a sacred duty to spread it anyway. "Said Carole doesn't belong to the Carters. Can you imagine? Must be true if her own sister says it." I gripped the can so tightly it dented. My own workplace, my small, hard-won sanctuary, wasn't safe from the poison of my sister's mouth. The gossip had traveled beyond my neighborhood. It had leaked into every corner where my name might land. In Raleigh, reputation spread faster than wildfire. Someone once told me, "In small towns, your business isn't just your business, it's the town's favorite meal." I was the meal now, served up cold with no chance to defend myself. I returned to my desk, cheeks burning, pulse hammering. I wasn't just humiliated, I was furious. If I let this continue, silence would be its own agreement. The workday ended, but the tension didn't. I walked through downtown Raleigh, the streets alive with the pulse of rush hour, my thoughts louder than the traffic. Part of me wanted to keep my head down, pretend none of it mattered. Another part, the part that had been pushed to the porch, abandoned in the rain, and warned to stop digging, knew better. Cressida's words rang in my ears. "You're not my blood," I whispered to myself, testing the sound of it. No, I won't let her erase me. Every step I took was heavier, but sharper. By the time the sun dipped low, painting the buildings with a dying orange light, I had made my choice. I would go to her house. I would say it to her face. Silence was complicity. And I wasn't complicit in my own destruction. I rehearsed in my head what I'd say, though I knew the words would probably crumble when the fire started. Still, I needed her to hear me, needed the world to hear me. Her door looked the same as it always had. White paint, black handle, the faint scratch where we used to drag our bikes past it. I knocked once, firm, before my courage could slip. The door opened, and there she was, my sister. No smile, no hesitation, just a wall of hostility. "What do you want now?" she snapped, her voice slicing through the air. I took a breath. "I want you to stop." She folded her arms, leaning against the frame like she owned not just the house, but the whole narrative. "Stop what?" "Dragging my name through the dirt, calling me not family. You don't get to erase me." Her laugh was cold. "Erase you? Carole, you're already gone. Nobody's coming to save you." My voice rose before I could temper it. "You can call me many things, but you don't get to decide who I am. You don't get to define me by your spite." Neighbors' doors cracked open. Curtains shifted. A couple of people leaned on their porches, curious. The stage had been set, and my humiliation became public spectacle. Cressida's eyes glittered, not with guilt, but triumph. "You think anyone will believe you over me? I'll make sure they don't. Keep pushing, and I'll ruin you." That was the blade. The threat not just of rejection, but obliteration. She wasn't satisfied with pushing me out. She wanted to salt the earth behind me. I felt heat rise in my chest, not shame this time, but something stronger. "You can poison every ear in this town, but you'll never kill the truth. One day, it'll come out, and when it does, it won't be me who looks small." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't answer. Around us, whispers floated through the evening air. Neighbors watching, absorbing, already deciding whose story to carry next. It was character assassination, dressed as family conflict. And I finally saw it for what it was. I stormed down the steps, suitcase handle digging into my palm, but I didn't keep quiet. My voice carried across the street, sharp and raw. I may not be your blood, but one day you'll regret pushing me out. The door slammed behind me, but the echo of my words lingered longer. I walked into the dark, the street swallowing me whole, my heart pounding with a mix of liberation and dread, because I knew my sister, and if she had threatened to destroy me, she wouldn't stop at words. That night, I realized she wasn't just rejecting me, she was preparing to wage war. The week had just begun, and I was trying to convince myself things were settling down. I arrived at the clinic that morning with a thermos of coffee and a small knot of hope in my stomach. The rhythm of work, the ringing phones, the shuffle of patient files, the polite smiles at the desk, offered a kind of refuge. For the first time in weeks, I felt as if I could exhale. That illusion broke before noon. My supervisor, Ms. Clark, tapped lightly on my desk. "Carole, could I see you in my office?" Her voice was calm but carried a weight that made my stomach twist. Inside, she closed the door and slid into her chair. She didn't waste time. "We've received a serious complaint about you." The words hit me like a slap. She explained. A call had come in, claiming I had stolen money in the past. Not here at the clinic, but elsewhere. The caller had said I was untrustworthy, that hiring me was a mistake. I didn't need to guess who it was. Cressida's fingerprints were all over it. "That's not true," I said firmly, though my cheeks burned. "I've never stolen a thing in my life." Mrs. Clark hesitated, folding her hands. "Carole, I don't want to believe it, but these kinds of rumors, they can stick. You understand?" I swallowed hard. There it was, the humiliation of being reduced to someone else's story. A lie can travel halfway around the world before the truth puts on its shoes. But I refused to let my sister's voice be louder than mine. I straightened in my chair, steadying myself. "Ms. Clark, I can give you references. People from my church, volunteer work I did last year. They'll vouch for me." She blinked, surprised at my composure. "You'd be willing to provide those?" "Of course," I said, my voice calm but unyielding, "because I have nothing to hide." For a moment, silence hung between us. Finally, she nodded. "All right, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. But Carole, please, keep personal matters outside this clinic. We can't afford distractions." I understood her warning. It wasn't just about work performance. It was about reputation, about being marked. Walking back to my desk, I clenched my fists. Cressida wasn't satisfied with turning the neighborhood against me. Now she was reaching into my livelihood. This wasn't family drama anymore. This was war. In my head, I thought, if she wanted war, she just declared it. By the time I made it back to my small rented room that evening, I was exhausted. I pulled off my shoes and collapsed onto the bed, scrolling through my phone just to quiet my mind. But instead of peace, I found fresh poison. On a local community forum, anonymous posts had sprung up. "That Carter girl is nothing but a fake daughter. She leeches off people, got kicked out for stealing." My pulse quickened as I scrolled. The words were sharp, cruel, dripping with familiarity. I knew the tone. I could almost hear my sister's voice lacing through every sentence, even if she hid behind false names. Some comments dismissed it, others fed the fire. A neighbor chimed in. "I heard the same thing. You can't trust her." Even one of the clinic staff had liked a post. My identity was being rewritten before my eyes, not by truth, but by venom. I stared at the screen, breath shallow. When you let someone else write your story, don't be surprised when you don't like the ending. But I wasn't about to hand her the pen. My first instinct was despair. My second was defiance. I reached for my phone and called Nadia. She answered on the second ring. "Carole, what's wrong?" I told her everything. About the call to the clinic, about the online posts, about the way Cressida was tearing me apart piece by piece. My voice cracked once, but I steadied it. Nadia listened quietly, then said, "Carole, people only throw stones at trees that bear fruit. If she's wasting this much energy on you, it means you still matter. Don't let her define you." Her words steadied me like an anchor. After we hung up, I sat at my tiny desk with the peeling paint and opened the forum again. But instead of reading the lies, I began to type. Not a defense, not a plea, a declaration. I wrote, "You don't choose the family you're born into, but you do choose the person you become. I choose honesty, resilience, and independence. Whatever people may say, I know who I am, and I will not live in shame for choices I never made." I hit post before doubt could silence me. Minutes passed. Then slowly, quietly, replies appeared. A neighbor I barely spoke to wrote, "Stay strong, Carole." A coworker left a heart. Even a stranger added, "Truth always outlasts lies." It wasn't a tidal wave of support, but it was something, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the faint spark of taking back control. That spark dimmed as quickly as it came. My phone buzzed with a new message, an unknown number, no profile picture, no name, just words. "Stop pretending, or the whole town will know what you really are." I froze, the chill sinking deep. This wasn't just gossip anymore. This was a threat. My hands trembled, but I whispered to myself, if she wants to destroy me, she better be ready for me to fight back. The battle lines were drawn, and I knew the next strike would cut deeper than ever. It was late Saturday afternoon when my phone rang. Aunt Margaret's voice came through, cheerful but unusually insistent. "Carole, we're having a family dinner tonight. I'd like you to come. Everyone will be there." For a moment, I was silent, gripping the phone tighter. After everything that had happened, an invitation like that didn't sound right. My instinct told me to say no, but Margaret added softly, "It's time we sit together again." After I hung up, I called Nadia. "It feels off. Why would they suddenly want me there?" "Maybe it's a chance," Nadia said. "Sometimes facing the fire is better than hiding from the smoke." I wanted to believe her, wanted to think reconciliation was possible. But in the back of my mind, a darker thought whispered, sometimes family dinners aren't about food, they're about who gets eaten alive. So I dressed carefully, not to impress but to protect my own dignity, and drove to Margaret's home with my heart knocking against my ribs. Her house looked warm and welcoming from the outside, lights glowing through lace curtains, cars parked in a neat row. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt it, the chill. Conversations dipped when I entered. Eyes slid across me like I was an intruder, not kin. My cousins whispered to one another, and an uncle avoided meeting my gaze. Then Cressida stood up, my sister, poised like a queen presiding over her court. "She's here," she announced. "Good. We can finally address what's been going on." I froze in the doorway, suddenly aware of every eye on me. She launched into her act, voice breaking in practiced places, painting herself as the wronged one. "Carole has been spreading lies about me, about our family. She wants to tear us apart. I've tried to stay quiet, but I can't anymore." Murmurs rose. Some relatives shook their heads, sympathetic to her. Then she pulled out her phone. "I have proof." She displayed screenshots of posts, words twisted, manipulated, as if I had written things I never said, snippets out of context, some altered completely. Gasps filled the room. "That's not me," I said firmly. "Truth doesn't need makeup. Lies always wear disguise." Cressida smirked. "You've always been jealous because you don't belong here." The air grew heavier, every accusation a drumbeat against my chest. But I wasn't going to crumble. I stepped forward, voice steady though my pulse raced. "Since when does family judge without hearing both sides?" I looked directly at Aunt Margaret. "Is this how we treat one another now? Trial by gossip?" For a heartbeat, the room was silent. Then Cressida struck again. "You want both sides? Fine." Her tone sharpened. "Why don't you tell them about the money you borrowed? About how you couldn't even pay your own bills without begging?" The crowd shifted. A few gasped audibly. My face burned hot, humiliation crawling up my neck. That was private, something I had once confided, twisted now into a weapon. I heard Nadia's voice in my head. You don't owe explanations to people committed to misunderstanding you. I drew a breath, lifted my chin. Yes, I struggled. I borrowed money once, and I paid it back. That doesn't make me untrustworthy. It makes me human. My eyes swept across the room. And if being family means turning my scars into entertainment, then maybe I don't need to sit at this table. Cressida's face hardened, but for the first time, some relatives looked uncertain. The tension snapped all at once. Voices rose, cousins arguing among themselves, uncles shaking their heads, Margaret calling for calm. I stood taller than I felt, my words cutting through the noise. If being family means destroying me, then I choose to walk away. The room fell silent. Chairs scraped against the floor as people shifted, some glaring at me, others watching with a glimmer of respect they wouldn't voice aloud. I walked to the door, my heartbeat thundering. Each step felt like both defeat and freedom. At the threshold, I turned once more. Sometimes you lose a family gathering, I said quietly. But you win your self-respect. No one followed me out. The night air hit my face, cool and sharp, as if the world itself was reminding me that survival sometimes means solitude. I climbed into my car, hands trembling on the steering wheel. Grief pressed heavy on me, but beneath it was something new. Release, bitter, but clean. Halfway down the road, my phone lit up. An unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. A voice hissed through the line, low and chilling. That was just the beginning. Next time, it won't just be words. The call ended. I gripped the wheel tighter, a shiver running down my spine. Whatever game my sister was playing, it had spilled far beyond family walls. And I knew then, this was no longer about reconciliation. It was about survival. The morning sunlight pushed through the blinds, but it didn't bring peace. I woke up with my head heavy, my body stiff from tossing and turning all night. Every word, every stare from the family dinner replayed like a broken record. My sister's voice echoed in my ears, sharp and cruel. I had walked away with my head high, but lying in bed now, I wondered, was it really strength? Or had I just handed her the victory? I dragged myself up, brewed coffee, and sat at the small kitchen table staring at the steam rising from the cup. My chest still ached. Family fights are supposed to leave scars on the heart, not shatter every corner of your life. Then I saw it. Through the window, glinting in the driveway, my car windshield, cracked wide open like a spiderweb of glass. My breath caught. For a second, I thought maybe I was imagining it. Maybe it was the sunlight tricking my eyes. But no, the closer I looked, the more jagged and violent the break became. Family disagreements are supposed to break hearts, not windows, I whispered bitterly. Hands trembling, I grabbed my phone and dialed the police. My voice shook as I reported the vandalism. This wasn't just anger anymore. It was escalation. Someone had crossed the line, and deep down, I knew who wanted me cornered badly enough to make a statement this loud. By the time the police arrived, neighbors had already gathered outside, curiosity written all over their faces. Mrs. Turner from across the street shook her head, her hand clutching her bathrobe. Carole, honey, I'm so sorry. I heard things. Folks been talking, she said softly. What kind of things? I asked, even though I already knew the answer would sting. That you've been unstable, causing trouble with your family. I don't believe it, she rushed to add. But you know how people chatter. Others weren't as kind. A man from 2 doors down muttered just loud enough for me to hear, "Guess where there's smoke, there's fire." The humiliation burned more than the broken windshield. My private battle was now a neighborhood spectacle. I felt naked under their judgment, stripped of dignity. But then, Mrs. Turner placed a hand on my arm and said something I needed to hear. You can't control their lies, Carole, but you can control your truth. I swallowed hard, forcing my tears back. She was right. Still, when I checked my phone later that afternoon, my stomach dropped. On the local community forum, Cruel posts had spread like wildfire. Anonymous accounts, though I recognized the tone, accused me of being a fake daughter, a thief who got kicked out of her own bloodline, a dangerous woman who couldn't be trusted. Twist after twist of words, each sharper than the last, cut deeper than the glass on my driveway. Neighbors had commented. Some defended me, but others nodded along, adding fuel to the fire. I gripped my phone so tightly I thought it might snap. My sister hadn't just turned relatives against me. She was rewriting my story in public. When you let someone else write your story, I thought grimly, don't be surprised when you don't like the ending. Desperate for steadiness, I called Nadia. Carole, talk to me. What happened now? She asked the moment she picked up. I told her about the car, the gossiping neighbors, the online posts. My voice cracked, but I kept talking. Silence wasn't going to protect me anymore. Nadia's response was calm, but firm. Listen to me carefully. Document everything. Take photos of the windshield. Screenshot every post. File another report. The truth may walk slowly, but it never loses the race. Her certainty grounded me. I grabbed my camera, snapped pictures of the shattered glass from every angle. I scrolled through the forum again, screenshotting every vile word, making sure I had evidence. Then I called the officer back, insisting the vandalism be tied to the ongoing harassment. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of strength. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was preparing. Still, fear lingered. If she could come after my car, what, or who, was next? That night, while I taped black plastic over the broken windshield, I whispered to myself, I may not win every battle, but I won't sit quietly while someone destroys me. Later, I opened my journal. The pen scratched across the page as if releasing the weight in my chest. I wrote about betrayal, about hurt, but also about dignity. I remembered a line from Maya Angelou. You may not control all the events that happen to you, but you can decide not to be reduced by them. The words steadied me. This war wasn't about being accepted into a family that had chosen to exile me. It was about refusing to let them reduce me into the villain of their story. I began to draft boundaries in ink, what I would no longer tolerate, what lines I would enforce with law if I had to. For the first time, instead of chasing reconciliation, I started preparing for survival. By the time I closed the journal, the house felt quieter, as if my decision had settled the chaos, at least for the night. But peace never lasted long. Just as I was about to turn in, I noticed an envelope slid under my front door. No name, no return address. My heart pounded as I bent down and picked it up. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No greeting, no signature, only one line, written in sharp ink. Next time, it won't be your car. I stood frozen in the doorway, the note trembling in my hands. The feud had moved beyond slander, beyond vandalism. It had turned into a warning of something worse. And I realized with a cold shiver, I wasn't just fighting for reputation anymore. I was fighting for safety. I kept the note in my nightstand drawer, folded and sharp at the edges, like it might cut me if I touched it too long. Every morning for the past week, I opened that drawer, half expecting the words to look different, but no, next time, it won't be your car. The letters stayed the same, and so did the unease they planted in me. Sleep had become foreign. My neighbors had started noticing the shadows under my eyes, the way I glanced over my shoulder before stepping outside. Even at work, my hands shook during simple tasks. That threat clung to me like smoke, reminding me that danger was no longer a possibility. It was a presence. Then the phone rang. It was the officer assigned to my case. His tone was measured, but I caught the weight in his words. We lifted prints from your vandalized car. They belong to someone with direct ties to your sister's social circle. The confirmation chilled me. It wasn't a random act. It wasn't coincidence. It was her war plan, and I was the chosen target. When the wolf shows its paw, I thought, you realize it's been circling you all along. Fear pressed down on me harder than ever, but beneath it flickered something else. Relief. At least now, the law had caught a scent. The courthouse loomed large that Monday morning, its stone facade cold against the rising sun. My stomach twisted as I walked up the steps, clutching a folder so full of evidence it nearly split open. Inside were photographs of my shattered windshield, screenshots of the poison spread online, and that note that had stolen my sleep. Nadia walked beside me, steady as always. "Remember," she said softly, "the law moves slower than anger, but it usually catches up." Her words were a lifeline. I repeated them silently as I stepped into the courtroom, the air thick with the weight of judgment. The officer guided me through the process. Questions about the vandalism, about the timeline, about the evidence I'd brought. And I answered carefully, voice steady though my palms sweated. Then came the twist I hadn't braced for. The prosecutor laid down documents, financial records. Payments had been traced, small but consistent, lining up with the days my property had been attacked. The source: my sister. It hit me harder than I expected. Betrayal wasn't new. I had tasted it for years, but seeing it in black and white, stamped with dates and dollar signs, left me breathless. She hadn't just whispered poison into ears, she had funded the campaign to break me. The room seemed to blur for a moment. I clutched the folder tighter, grounding myself. "Miss Carole," the judge's voice cut through the fog, "do you confirm these threats have caused you personal distress and harm?" I lifted my chin. "Yes, Your Honor. And I confirm that no one should have to defend themselves from their own blood." And then, there she was. For the first time since that dinner, I saw my sister sitting across the aisle, her expression carved in ice. When our eyes met, the air between us crackled like a live wire. She leaned slightly, her lips barely moving, whispering words no one else could hear. "You'll regret this." I didn't flinch. When it was my turn to testify, I stood tall. My voice carried every ounce of pain, but also every piece of strength I'd gathered through years of surviving her attacks. My sister has painted me as unstable, untrustworthy, unwanted. She's taken family arguments and turned them into public trials. She's broken my car, spread lies in my neighborhood, tried to reduce me to nothing. But let me tell you this: blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family, and loyalty has been absent from her actions for a very long time. Some in the courtroom shifted, whispers rippling like wind in leaves. My sister sat rigid, her jaw tightening. I went on, describing not only the vandalism and the online smears, but the emotional siege that had followed me for years. I spoke not like a victim, but like a witness determined to set the record straight. By the time I finished, even the judge seemed moved. The room felt different, less like a battlefield, more like the beginning of balance. When the session ended, the judge ruled for a temporary restraining order against my sister and set a date for a full trial. It wasn't the end, but it was a shield. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe without feeling hunted. Walking out of the courthouse, Nadia squeezed my hand. "Justice doesn't heal the wound," she said, "but it stops the bleeding." Her words sank deep. I thought about the girl I was 15 years ago, the one thrown out of her family home, begging for a scrap of belonging. That girl had been crushed under silence. The woman walking down those courthouse steps was different. She wasn't asking to be accepted anymore. She was demanding to be respected. The relief was sharp but fragile. Victory wasn't full, but it was real enough to carry me forward. That evening, back in my small kitchen, I set the folder of evidence on the table and let myself exhale. For the first time in days, I thought maybe, just maybe, the tide had begun to turn. But peace, as always, was fleeting. My phone buzzed. A voicemail notification blinked. I pressed play. The voice on the other end was unmistakable, hers, but it wasn't the cold confidence I'd seen in the courtroom. This voice trembled, broken at the edges. "You don't understand, Carole," she whispered. "If I fall, we both fall." I froze, the words slicing deeper than any threat she had ever made. What secrets was she holding? What history did she think could take me down with her? I stared at the phone, silent, realizing that justice had opened more than a door. It had cracked open a vault I might not be ready to face. I must have replayed her voicemail 20 times, leaning against my kitchen counter, listening to every uneven breath. "If I fall, we both fall." The words scratched at me, raising more questions than answers. My sister had delivered threats before, but this one sounded different. Not venom, but warning. I called Nadia, holding the phone like it might steady me. "Do you think she meant it literally?" Nadia was quiet a moment, then said, "Carole, secrets rot faster in silence than in sunlight. Whatever she's hiding, it's big enough she's terrified of it being exposed. The question is, are you ready to know it?" I stared at the note I'd kept on the table, the one about my car. Part of me wanted to walk away, let the court handle it, bury the rest. But my gut told me what Nadia already knew. This wasn't just about sibling rivalry. Something larger had been running beneath the surface all along. And for the first time, I wondered if uncovering it would break me more than her lies ever had. The memory came sudden and sharp. An old brass key tucked away in the bottom of a jewelry box my mother left behind. I had never figured out what it unlocked. She used to call it a key to things that must stay safe. 2 days later, with that key in my coat pocket, I drove to the outskirts of town. The storage facility looked forgotten, rows of rusted doors, weeds growing through the gravel. The manager didn't even look up when I signed the logbook. The unit creaked when I opened it, the stale air hitting me with dust and silence. Inside were cardboard boxes stacked unevenly, yellowed labels curling at the corners. It felt like stepping into a time capsule no one had touched since my mother's passing. I sifted through photo albums, brittle with age, letters bundled with string, ledgers filled with numbers that made no sense to me at first. Then, as I read deeper, a pattern began to form. Payments, debts, names I didn't recognize, notes in my father's handwriting about keeping men satisfied and never letting Margaret know. Cold ran through me. These weren't casual debts. They tied to people whose names had weight, people you didn't cross lightly. My sister must have known. Maybe she still owed them. That was when it clicked. Her hostility hadn't been only about resenting me. She had been carrying a noose around her neck, one our father left behind, and she was desperate to keep me from pulling the rope tighter. Shock mixed with a strange ache of empathy. For the first time in years, I wondered if her cruelty was survival disguised as rage. Near the bottom of a trunk, I found a small tin box. Inside, envelopes sealed with my mother's neat handwriting. My breath caught. Each was addressed to me. Letters meant for a daughter, but never given. Hands trembling, I opened the first one. "Carole, if you are reading this, it means time has kept me from speaking to you myself. Trust is a fragile thing in this family. Never take what you see at face value." Her voice came alive through the ink, every loop of her pen carrying warmth and fear. I read one after another, each more haunting. She suspected betrayal within her own home. She spoke of truths she wanted me to know when I was old enough to bear them. And then, the letter that stole the air from my chest. "Carole, there is something about your beginning I could not tell you when you were young. You may have been raised under this name, but your bloodline is not what you believe. Appearances were arranged to protect you. Please forgive the silence." I dropped the page into my lap, staring as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less shattering. The echo of my sister's voice from years ago crashed over me. "You're not my blood!" I had dismissed it then as cruelty in the heat of an argument. But what if it had been the raw, ugly truth? I pressed my palms to my eyes, tears cutting hot paths down my face. My world wasn't just cracked, it was hollow. I called Nadia again, voice shaking. I found letters, From my mother. She said I may not be who I thought I was. Nadia was steady, always steady. Carole, listen to me. Sometimes truth is a weapon sharper than any blade. You decide when to unsheath it. Don't rush to destroy yourself just because your sister wants you cornered. I sat in silence, staring at the papers spread across the table. If I revealed them, the family name would burn to ash. If I stayed quiet, I'd carry the weight of not knowing who I truly was. The thought looped endlessly. Who am I if I'm not who I thought I was? For the first time, I feared the truth more than my sister. That night, exhaustion pulled me under, but only lightly. Around midnight, a soft scrape woke me, the sound of paper sliding across my doorframe. Heart hammering, I rushed to the entrance. No footsteps, no car, just an envelope, plain and unmarked. I opened it carefully. Inside was one sheet of paper. You think you found the truth, but you only touched the surface. The words blurred as I read them again and again. Someone knew what I had uncovered. Someone was watching. I sank into the chair by the window, clutching the note, staring into the night beyond my glass. The discovery that should have given me answers had only tied me deeper in shadows, and whoever was out there, they weren't finished with me yet. The morning of the final hearing, I stood in front of my mirror, the sealed letters tucked neatly into a leather folder. I could see my own reflection staring back at me, older, marked by years of battles I never asked for, but not broken. For a long time, I had thought exposing my sister was about revenge, a way to strike back after being cast out and humiliated. But as I gripped the folder tighter, I understood. This wasn't about settling a score anymore. It was about ending a cycle of silence that had consumed our family for decades. Nadia came by early, her calm presence steadying me like an anchor. She placed a hand on my arm and said, "Courage isn't the absence of fear, Carole. It's deciding something else matters more." She told me it was Ambrose Redmoon who said it, but her voice made it sound like her own truth. I took a deep breath, picked up my bag, and walked toward the courthouse. Every step on the pavement felt heavier than the last, carrying the weight of generations, the lies of my father, the warnings of my mother, and the venom of my sister. I knew that by the end of the day, nothing in my life would remain untouched. And somewhere deep down, I sensed it. My sister was about to face the truth she had spent years burying under threats, manipulation, and rage. The courtroom was thick with anticipation. I sat at the witness table, my folder in front of me, while my sister sat just feet away, her chin tilted defiantly, though her eyes flickered with unease. When it was my turn, I stood, unfolding one of my mother's letters. My voice didn't waver as I read aloud the words my mother had written years ago but never delivered to me. "Carole, trust is fragile. Never take what you see at face value." Gasps broke out in the room when I continued, revealing the letter about my parentage. Murmurs rippled across the benches, the kind of sound that spreads like fire. My sister's face drained of color, and for once, her mouth had no words ready to bite back. I looked directly at her, my voice steady as stone. "You screamed at me once that I wasn't your blood. You were right, but that doesn't make you innocent. You used the truth like a weapon, and you let me carry the shame alone." I laid out the documents, the debts, the financial cover-ups, the payments that traced directly back to her. One by one, I stacked the evidence on the table, each page another nail in the coffin of her lies. Her mask cracked. She muttered under her breath, "You'll regret this." But I didn't flinch. Instead, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "No, the only regret I carry is not standing up sooner." The courtroom shifted. It wasn't just about fraud or vandalism anymore. It was about betrayal so deep it cut through the marrow of family. For years, she painted me as the unstable one, the outcast. But in that moment, with the truth blazing out in black and white, it was her who stood exposed. When the judge gave her a chance to respond, my sister clung to her last defense. "I did what I had to do. Our father left me with debts you couldn't imagine. It was survival, keeping them off our backs, keeping us alive." Her voice wavered, not with remorse, but with desperation. I answered, my words sharp but calm. Survival without honor is just another kind of death. You chose betrayal over truth. You could have leaned on me, but instead, you destroyed me. The judge's expression hardened. The jury shifted, heads shaking. My sister's words had no weight against the evidence, against the decades of cruelty now unmasked. When the gavel finally fell, the ruling was clear: guilty. Not only of fraud and intimidation, but of conspiring to bury family secrets through lies and manipulation. I felt something inside me loosen, a chain breaking, a storm finally clearing. Years of injustice I had carried on my shoulders lifted in that single moment. She had weaponized blood, and now it turned back on her. Outside the courthouse, the late afternoon sun painted the steps in gold. I paused there, the same place where once I had stood in shame, cast out with nothing. Today, I stood in victory, not because I destroyed her, but because I refused to stay silent. Memories washed over me. The night I was thrown out, my sister's jeers echoing in my ears, the years I rebuilt my life in fragments. And now, here I was, holding the final word. I whispered to myself, forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it means freeing yourself from chains someone else put on you. Nadia joined me on the steps, her arm looping through mine. You broke the cycle today. You didn't just fight for yourself, Carole. You fought for every person who's been told to shut up and bear it. That matters. I nodded, tears stinging my eyes, but they weren't tears of grief. They were release. I'll keep my mother's letters, I told her, not as scars, but as reminders, warnings, lessons. This ends with me. We walked down the steps together, our pace steady, not rushed. For the first time in years, I felt my shoulders lighter. Justice had spoken, not perfectly, not completely, but enough to give me back the power I had been denied. That night, I returned home, exhaustion rolling over me like a wave. I set my mother's letters carefully on my desk, touched the envelope edges with reverence, and whispered into the quiet, "It ends with me." For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to exhale, believing maybe, just maybe, the storm had passed. But then the phone rang, an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. A man's voice, calm, steady, and chilling. "You think it ended today?" "You just cut into a bigger wound." The line clicked dead. I stood frozen in the dark, the echo of his words filling the silence. I had won the battle, but the war was far from over.